I was hiking through a thick stretch of woods in eastern Tennessee, somewhere near the edge of Cherokee National Forest. It wasn't a marked trail, just one I'd found through a mix of satellite maps and gut instinct. I like wandering off the beaten path, especially when I'm out for the weekend. No crowds, no noise, just trees, dirt, and whatever wildlife happens to be passing through. That morning was humid, the kind of damp that makes your shirt stick to your back even before noon. The forest was alive. Birds chirping, insects buzzing, the occasional rustle in the brush that was probably a squirrel or armadillo. I'd been hiking for a couple of hours, picking my way through thick undergrowth, when I saw something strange ahead. Something square and dark, hidden behind a curtain of vines and branches. I pushed through the growth and found myself standing in front of what looked like the collapsed mouth of an old mining tunnel. The opening was mostly covered by wooden boards, warped and dark with age, some half-rotted away. Moss and lichen grew thick over everything. It looked like no one had been near it for years, maybe decades. The air coming out of it felt cooler than the outside, and there was this faint smell, wet earth maybe mixed with something metallic. It gave me that weird, stomach-twisting feeling, like I was trespassing even though I didn't know on what. Most people probably would have just snapped a picture and kept going. But I've always been the kind of person who wants to see what's behind the door, so to speak. Curiosity isn't just a habit for me, it's almost like a compulsion. So I crouched down, tugged at one of the loose boards, and after a little effort, slipped through the gap. Inside, the space opened up a bit. The tunnel wasn't deep, maybe 30 feet in before it dead-ended. The ceiling was low, and I had to stoop the whole way. The walls were rock and dirt, with a few old wooden support beams keeping it from collapsing completely. The floor sloped slightly down and was dry, which surprised me. No signs of flooding, even with the dampness outside. Near the back of the tunnel, in a little cleared area, there was a stained mattress pushed up against the rock wall. A 5-gallon bucket sat beside it, the kind you find at hardware stores. Next to that was a rusted metal pot, an empty bottle of water, and a torn jacket balled up like a pillow. It was obvious someone had been living there. Recently? Hard to tell. But the place didn't have that abandoned smell. No mold, no rodents chewing at the corners. Just stale air and the quiet buzz of distant insects. I stood there for a minute, taking it all in. My headlamp cast a harsh circle of light across the mattress, the bucket, the crumpled jacket. I didn't touch anything. I didn't want to. Something about it felt personal, like stumbling into someone's room without permission. I was about to turn around and head back out when I heard it. A whistle, soft, just 3 notes, not a bird, not wind, came from outside. I froze. My skin prickled instantly. I turned off my headlamp and stood perfectly still in the dark, straining to hear. A few seconds passed. Then came a sound like shuffling, leaves being stepped on, slow and steady. Close, just outside the tunnel entrance. I waited. 10 seconds, maybe 20. No more noise. I crouched low and crept back toward the tunnel opening. Every step felt loud. I stayed just inside the entrance, barely breathing, trying to make out anything through the vines and boards. The light outside was still bright, maybe early afternoon by then, but the contrast between the dark tunnel and the sunlit woods made it hard to see clearly. No movement, no voices, nothing. After another minute, I eased out through the gap I came in from, moving slow and low, trying not to make a sound. My heart was pounding hard. I scanned the tree line, the surrounding brush, the ground. No one in sight, but right outside the entrance, maybe 5 feet from the boards, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small, flat patch of cleared dirt. Not natural, like someone had been standing there a lot. Right in the middle of that patch was a pile of cigarette butts. At least 20, all stubbed out in the same spot. Fresh, too, not soaked, not bleached by sun or rain. And next to the pile was a pair of binoculars. Black, slightly scuffed, but clean. I picked them up without thinking. They were warm, not sun-warm. Warm like someone had just been holding them, maybe even watching me as I went into that tunnel. That feeling, the one I had earlier, came back stronger. That I wasn't alone. That I wasn't supposed to be here. I scanned the woods again, spinning in place, every leaf movement making me flinch. Still nothing, just birds and trees and silence. I wanted to yell, just shout something out and break the tension. But I didn't. I slipped the binoculars into my backpack and started walking fast. Not quite running, but close. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I followed my GPS track the exact way I came in, double-checking every step. After about a mile, I forced myself to stop and listen again. Still nothing behind me, but the forest didn't feel the same anymore. The air felt heavier, the shadows thicker. Every time I passed a tree with dense brush, I expected someone to step out. I didn't camp that night like I planned. I kept walking until I hit the nearest fire road, then hiked another hour until I got back to the trailhead where I'd parked. I drove out without even changing out of my boots. Later, back at home, I looked at the binoculars more carefully. There were initials scratched faintly on the side, AM, but no brand name, no sticker, no identifying marks beyond that. I still don't know why I took them. Maybe because I didn't want to leave them behind in case whoever left them was watching. Or maybe I just needed proof that what happened actually did. I reported what I saw to a ranger the next week. Told them about the tunnel, the mattress, the sign someone had been living there. They nodded, said they'd check it out. I never followed up. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since. There's no good ending here, no big revelation, no neat closure. Just the knowledge that someone had been watching me, that maybe they still were, and that if I'd taken just a few minutes longer inside that tunnel, I might have met them. I'd been planning the trip for weeks. Just me, a pack, and a solo overnight in the Wallowa Mountains in northeastern Oregon. It wasn't my first time hiking alone, but it had been a while since I'd done a true off-grid night with no reception, no trail traffic, and no company. I parked at the trailhead in the early afternoon and hiked in about 6 miles. The sky was already starting to shift by the time I found a flat patch near a shallow stream. Perfect spot. Fresh water, enough space for my tent, and some trees nearby for cover. The place looked used, not trashed, just lived in. There was a stone fire pit near the edge of the trees, and the rocks were dark with soot. I knelt beside it and put my hand near the ashes. Still warm, not burning, but definitely recent. There were boot prints in the dirt too, leading from the pit to the stream, then off deeper into the woods like someone had left in a hurry. The prints looked fresh. The edges were sharp, not weathered or crumbling. My first thought was that maybe someone had camped there the night before and just packed up a little late. Maybe they were only a few minutes ahead of me. I stood up and scanned the trees but didn't see anyone. I shrugged it off. There were no bags, no trash, nothing left behind except a few small logs that hadn't burned through and some half-buried tracks. It's not like I had cell signal to check for other people in the area, and the next best camp spot was at least another hour's hike uphill. I wasn't in the mood to chase daylight. I figured they'd moved on, and it was fine to take the spot. I pitched my tent close to the tree line and set up my gear. Hung my food in a bag from a high branch, filtered some water from the stream, and sat back to eat a cold dinner. The sky went from pink to deep purple fast, and I could feel the temperature start to dip. I skipped a fire, didn't really need one, and the warmth from the sun was still lingering in the rocks. I was already tucked into my sleeping bag by the time it went fully dark. I don't know how long I was asleep before the smell hit me. Smoke, not faint, not leftover. This was strong, fresh. It burned my nose like someone had just struck a match right outside my tent. I opened my eyes and waited, listening. Everything was quiet, too quiet. No insects, no wind, just the smell, thick and sharp. I unzipped the tent as slowly as I could and leaned out. About 100 feet away, near the same fire pit, there was a fire burning. Not a bonfire, not wild. It was low and controlled, like someone had just started it for warmth or cooking. I stared at it for a long time, waiting to hear footsteps or movement. Nothing. The fire didn't flicker like someone was moving around it. There were no shadows, no sign of a person. Just that low, steady flame. I called out once, just loud enough to carry. Nothing. No reply, not even a shift in the trees. I waited another minute, my heart beating too fast. I felt stupid just sitting there, staring at it, but something in my gut told me not to walk over. I ducked back inside the tent and zipped it halfway, just enough to keep watch. I didn't sleep after that. Eventually, sometime close to morning, the fire was gone. No slow fade, no dying glow. One moment it was there, the next it was just a black circle of ash. I thought maybe I drifted off for a few minutes and missed whoever left, but I didn't hear a thing. Not a single footstep, not a branch crack, nothing. When the sky turned light enough to see, I finally got out of the tent and walked over to the fire pit. The rocks were cold. No smoke, no heat, just gray ash and blackened bits of wood. I stood over it for a while, still feeling half asleep. That's when I saw it. In the center of the ash, sticks, charred but still shaped, arranged to form letters. My name, first and last. It was spelled clean, deliberate, not something that happened by accident. Someone had taken the time to pick sticks and shape them, then burn them into the message. They'd used different sized pieces, even snapped a few to get the letters right. Some were just lightly blackened, like they'd been placed after the fire had mostly died down. I stared at it for a long time, not really breathing. There's no way it was a coincidence. No one knew I was out there. I hadn't told anyone my exact route, just a general idea of the area. And there weren't any other campers nearby. No tire tracks at the trailhead, no voices on the trail, no tents tucked behind trees. I hadn't seen a single person all day. I walked a wide circle around the campsite, scanning the dirt and brush for new tracks. There were more boot prints now. Some were mine, sure, but some weren't. Larger, wider stride. They came from deeper in the woods, led up to the fire pit, and disappeared into the brush behind it. No trail, no obvious path. Just flattened grass and a few snapped twigs. I packed fast. I didn't even bother with breakfast. My hands were shaking too much to light my stove. I shoved everything into my pack, yanked down the food bag, and got moving. I didn't even look back at the fire pit as I left. I followed my GPS watch back down the way I came, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Still no one, still nothing. But the woods felt different, heavy, like I wasn't alone anymore. The trail felt longer on the way back. My legs were tight, and every sound in the trees felt too close. A bird flapping, a squirrel darting. Every single one made my spine stiffen. I didn't stop until I saw my car. I got in, locked the doors, and sat for a full minute before I even started the engine. I didn't report it. What would I say? No crime, no threat, just a name spelled in ash by someone who didn't want to be seen. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had followed me. Maybe it was just another camper with a twisted sense of humor. But I don't think so. It wasn't the fire or the message that stuck with me. It was how quiet it all was. No footsteps, no voices, no lights, just that sudden, controlled fire. Like someone had been waiting in the trees, close enough to watch me set up camp, close enough to know my name. I haven't been back to Wallowa since. I still hike, still camp, but not alone, and not without telling someone exactly where I'm going. Backpacking alone through Idaho's backcountry wasn't something I planned to do on a whim. I prepped for months. My route was stitched together from bits of old trail maps and advice on backpacking forums. Some official, some just lines drawn in red ink across forest terrain. I wanted quiet. I wanted isolation. I didn't want to see other campers, and for 3 days I didn't. The weather had held out fine until the afternoon of day 4. That's when the clouds rolled in quick and low, like someone dragging a dirty gray blanket across the sky. It went from dry to hailing in minutes. Not small stuff either. Ice chunks bouncing off my pack and helmeting the trail around me. I yanked my poncho from the outside of my pack and threw it over myself, but it wasn't going to do much good if I kept walking. I needed shelter, fast. I remembered something from an old topo map, an abandoned ranger shelter marked just off a ridgeline a couple miles up. No guarantee it was still standing, but I didn't have many options. I kept my head down and hiked hard. My boots squelched through freezing runoff, hail stinging my arms and face when the wind shifted just right. I cursed at the cold and the weight of the gear, at myself for not turning around earlier. The shelter was barely visible through the trees. It looked more like a hunter's shack than any ranger outpost, tucked into the base of a slope and half covered by thick brush and old pine needles. I pushed the door open. It creaked loud, but held. Inside was dry. That was all I cared about at first. I stepped in and shook off the poncho. The space was small, maybe 10 feet by 10. Bare wooden walls. A single narrow cot against one side with a sun-bleached sleeping pad still lying on it. A broken lantern sat on the floor near the door. The shelves on the back wall sagged under the weight of dust-covered cans. Labels mostly faded. Some you could still read. Beans, peaches, condensed milk. Judging by the design, they hadn't been touched in decades. There was no light switch, no wiring at all that I could see. It was cold inside, but not as cold as the hail outside. I figured I'd wait it out for an hour or two, maybe dry my socks and make some tea. I set my pack down, took off my boots, and started rubbing warmth back into my feet. As the wind screamed through the trees outside, the inside of that shack felt like a vacuum. No wind, no sound, not even the usual creaks or groans old wooden buildings make, just stillness. That's when I noticed the carvings. They were on the far wall just above the cot. I thought it was graffiti at first, kids or bored hunters scratching names, but the closer I looked, the more detailed it all became. Dozens of names, maybe 100. First names only, some full names, some just initials. Next to most were dates. They ranged all over the place: 1983, 1991, 2004. A few more recent: 2016, 2019. Nothing after 2021. But what stopped me cold was one carving near the center. The letters were larger, deeper. Someone had really worked at it with a knife or chisel. It said, "Left here 3 nights. Do not stay 4." I stared at that line for a long time. It didn't feel like a joke. Something about the way it was cut into the wood felt too serious, like someone needed whoever came after to listen. My first thought was exposure. Maybe someone had nearly died of cold or dehydration and was warning others. But the shelter was solid. A little weather-worn, sure, but safe enough. I'd definitely seen worse. The storm outside didn't let up for hours. Hail turned to rain, then back to hail again. I boiled water, ate a protein bar, tried to stay calm. That message on the wall kept pulling my eyes back to it, like it was the only thing in the room with a pulse. I decided right then I wasn't staying the night. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and I figured if I left now, I could make it back down the ridge before dark. Maybe find a safer place to set up camp. I packed quickly. As I slung my bag over my shoulder and turned to leave, I spotted something near the inside of the door that made me stop. It was another carving, one I hadn't noticed when I came in. Lower on the wall, close to where the lantern sat. Smaller letters, freshly cut, light-colored, the way new wood looks when it's just been scraped. It said, "Third night begins tonight." My throat tightened. I hadn't stayed a full night. I hadn't even slept here, just waited out a storm. But reading that made me feel like I was already behind schedule, like some clock had been running and I hadn't known it. I opened the door and stepped into the clearing. The rain had stopped. The light outside was that weird silvery gray you get before sundown after a storm. Everything was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, no dripping branches. I started hiking downhill, fast. My legs were stiff from sitting, but adrenaline kicked in and pushed me. I didn't look back at the shelter. I didn't want to. I moved for about 30 minutes before I realized something was wrong. I was gaining elevation again. I was supposed to be going down. The slope had changed without me noticing. I pulled out my GPS dead. Wouldn't turn on. The battery pack I used to keep it charged had slipped out of its pouch at some point. Gone. My compass was in the side pouch of my pack. I took it out. The needle spun lazily, never settling. I tapped it, shook it, nothing. I tried following the sun's position, but the light had shifted fast and heavy clouds were moving back in. I checked the map, but without knowing where I was exactly, it was useless. The trees around me were all the same: tall, thin pine, thick underbrush, no real landmarks. I kept walking, tried to guess my way back to the last real trail I remembered. The sun dipped low, and the temperature dropped fast. I stopped to pull on my jacket, then decided I needed to camp. Wandering in the dark would get me hurt. I found a relatively flat patch under a big cedar, set up my tent, and got a small fire going. Ate some jerky, drank water. Every few minutes, I'd hear something in the distance. A crack of a branch, the sound of movement, but never close, just far enough to keep me nervous. When night fully fell, I lay in the tent but didn't sleep. I kept picturing that carving. Third night begins tonight. What did it mean? Was it some hiker's way of screwing with people? Was I just tired and reading too much into it? Sometime after midnight, I sat up and realized I could see faint light through the trees. Not moonlight, this was orange and flickering, like a fire. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards off, there was firelight. Low, controlled. Someone camping? I almost called out. Almost. But then I noticed there were no shadows, no figures moving around it, just firelight. Something felt wrong. I quietly zipped the tent back up and killed the fire I'd made. Sat in the dark, listening. That firelight stayed for hours. Never changed shape, never moved, never died down. Then just before dawn, it vanished. Not slowly, like someone had blown it out in a second. When daylight came, I packed my gear fast and started moving again. I walked for 6 straight hours. No breaks, just trying to find anything familiar. Trail markers, streams, anything. Nothing. Then I saw it. Through a break in the trees. The same clearing. The same slanted roofline. Same damn shack. I stood there for a long time before I stepped in again. Everything was as I'd left it. The can shelves, the cot, the broken lantern, and next to the door, another carving had appeared. The letters were small, thin, scratched hastily. 4th night tonight. I didn't waste time. I turned and ran. I didn't care which direction. I ran until my legs gave out and I had to crawl. I forced myself to keep going. Hours later, late afternoon, I stumbled onto a ranger service road. I followed it for 2 miles until I reached a station. The ranger who found me said I looked like I hadn't slept in days. He asked where I'd come from. I told him I didn't know anymore, just that I wasn't going back. I've never hiked in Idaho again. I had a long weekend and needed to get away from people, from noise, from everything. So I drove out to a lesser-known trail in Pennsylvania, somewhere not on any popular hiking blogs or state park maps. I'd found the route on a forum where serious hikers posted unmarked trails. One guy mentioned this place near the Allegheny National Forest, said it was peaceful and underused. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light, just enough food and water for the day, a small first aid kit, and a knife. No plans to camp. Just walk for hours, clear my head, then drive home. The trailhead wasn't marked. Just a pull-off on a narrow gravel road with a rusted gate that probably hadn't been shut in years. I parked my car and made a mental note of my surroundings. No cell service, no other vehicles, thick woods. It was early morning. Sunlight was just coming through the trees. The air smelled clean. Wet leaves, pine, a bit of old fire smoke from somewhere far off. I locked my car and started walking. The trail was narrow, uneven, mostly just a game path. No signs, no markers, just worn earth and the occasional broken branch where someone else had stepped through. I hiked for maybe an hour before stopping to rest near a clearing. It wasn't a big space, just a patch of open ground where the grass grew taller. I dropped my pack, stretched, and sat on a flat rock to drink some water. That's when the feeling hit me. Off, like something wasn't right. I wasn't tired, but my chest felt tight. My skin prickled. I looked around. Everything was still. Birds chirping, trees swaying, but I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I stood up and scanned the ridge to my right. That's when I saw them. 3 figures standing along the top of the ridge, maybe 200 yards away. Just silhouettes against the sky. They weren't walking. They weren't moving at all. just standing there, looking. At least it felt like they were looking down at me. I waited a few seconds, then raised my hand and waved. No response, not even a flinch. I stared for another minute. I wanted to believe they were hikers like me, maybe hunters, but something didn't fit. They had no visible gear, no backpacks, no hats, no water bottles. Just people too far to make out details, but close enough to know they were watching. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. I didn't wait any longer. I slung my pack over my shoulder and moved back onto the trail. For a while, I didn't see them again. I tried to convince myself they had just been random folks taking in the view. But every now and then, I'd glance up toward the ridges that ran alongside the trail, and I'd see one of them. Just one this time. Then later, another, a different ridge. Never all three at once again. Always standing still. Never closer. Never moving that I could see. But they kept reappearing, always somewhere above, somewhere behind. My pace picked up. The trail started curving downhill, following the edge of a small ravine. There was a stream below, trickling faintly through the trees. I didn't stop to listen. I didn't stop for anything. Just kept going. I didn't want to run, didn't want to look panicked, but I didn't want to stop either. My legs started to ache, but I pushed through it. I wasn't thinking about lunch anymore. I wasn't enjoying the quiet or the beauty of the woods. I just wanted to get back to my car. The trail split in two about a mile before the road. I hadn't noticed the fork on the way in. The left path looked a little more used, like more boots had passed over it. The right was overgrown and tight. I hesitated for maybe 5 seconds, then picked the left. I figured it must lead back toward the parking spot. I hadn't seen a single person all day, and now I just wanted this to be over. The trail curved around a rock face, then dipped down through a thicket of pines. It felt darker here, even though it was still daylight. The trees were tight, the ground soft with needles. My steps barely made a sound. That's when I caught a smell, faint, but sharp, like sweat, body odor, human, not mine. I stopped walking and held my breath. Nothing moved, no footsteps, no wind, just that same heavy silence. I didn't wait around. I pushed forward, quicker now. I kept looking behind me over my shoulder, but the trail twisted too much to see far. The forest was dense. If someone was following, I'd never spot them until they were close. My knife was in my pack. Dumb. Should have kept it on my belt. I kept going. After what felt like another hour, the trees finally thinned. I recognized the gravel road through the gaps in the trunks. I broke into a fast walk, almost a jog, until I reached the parking area. My car was the only one there. I exhaled, relieved, but still keyed up. I opened the door, tossed my pack in, and sat down hard in the driver's seat. That's when I saw the note. It was folded, tucked under the driver's side wiper blade. Plain white paper, nothing written on the outside. My hands were shaking a little when I opened it. "You're lucky you kept moving." That's all it said. Neat handwriting. No name, no date. I looked around fast. Nothing. Just woods. Just trees. I got out and checked the back of the car. Nothing looked tampered with. No slashed tires. No messed up locks. I turned a slow circle, scanning the tree line. No movement, but I couldn't shake the feeling they were still out there. Maybe watching. Maybe waiting to see what I'd do. I drove out fast. Gravel kicked up under the tires. I didn't stop until I hit pavement 20 minutes later. I didn't turn on music. I didn't eat. I just drove, staring at the road, trying not to think too hard. I tossed the note into the glove compartment and slammed it shut. That night, I lay in bed with the lights on. I live alone. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every passing car felt like it was slowing down too much. Couldn't sleep. I never posted about the trail. Never went back to that part of Pennsylvania. I told myself I was probably overreacting. Maybe it was just locals messing with an outsider. Maybe those figures weren't following me. Maybe the note was left by someone trying to scare off hikers from private land. But the truth is, I don't know who they were. I don't know how they moved like that, always staying at a distance but never far. And I don't know how they got to my car without me seeing them. All I know is I was lucky I didn't stop. Lucky I kept moving. Lucky, I guess, that I made it back. We'd been planning the trip for weeks. My girlfriend and I wanted something off-grid, away from everything. No phones, no work, no traffic, just the two of us in the woods. We picked a spot in Vermont, deep in the Green Mountains, past the last bit of paved road, where the GPS dropped out and the forest took over. We left the car at a trailhead and hiked about 4 miles in, following a narrow path that barely looked used. The site we found was perfect. A flat patch under some tall spruce trees, soft ground covered in pine needles, just close enough to a stream for water but far enough that we couldn't hear it unless the wind was right. We set up the tent, gathered firewood, filtered water. It was all quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence that feels like a blanket. No cell service, no hum of traffic, nothing. Just birds, wind, and us. The first day was normal. We cooked over a small fire, boiled rice and canned beans. Ate in the dusk, watched the sky change colors through the trees. At night, we sat close and listened to the forest settle. I remember thinking how far away everything felt, like we weren't part of the world anymore. No glow in the sky, no planes overhead, nothing man-made in sight. We went to bed a little after 10. I slept hard. It had been a long hike in and I was dead tired. Woke up once in the middle of the night needing to pee, stepped out of the tent, did my business and got back in. The stars were out, bright and cold looking. Nothing strange. The second day we stayed close to camp. Explored the area, went upstream a bit, found a mossy rock outcrop to sit on. The weather was perfect, cool but dry, just enough sun through the trees to keep things warm. We talked about maybe making this a yearly thing. I took a few photos with my phone earlier that day. Nothing special, just the trees, the tent, her smiling by the water. Then I turned it off and stuffed it in my pack. That night felt different. I didn't notice it at first, but later, thinking back, the forest was too quiet. The birds stopped earlier. No rustling, no crickets, just stillness. We stayed up a bit later, watching the fire burn low, wrapped in our sleeping bags with the tent flap open. I thought maybe I was just imagining it, that my ears were playing tricks on me. But something felt off. I didn't say anything. She seemed fine. We turned in around midnight. Zip up the tent, double-check the food was hung in the tree, blow out the lantern. Standard stuff. We crawled into the sleeping bags, side by side, and lay there in the dark. Sometime in the night, I woke up again. I don't know why. No sound, no movement, just suddenly awake. I listened for a while, waiting for my brain to settle. It was pitch dark. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, thinking it was weird how awake I felt. I didn't check the time. Eventually, I drifted off again. The next morning, when I unzipped the tent and stepped out, the first thing I saw was my phone. It was on the ground just outside the tent, face up. The screen was cracked. One long fracture running corner to corner, like it had been dropped on a rock. I hadn't touched it since I packed it away the day before. It had been zipped inside my pack in the outer pocket. I picked it up, trying to figure out how it ended up there. The battery was down to 5%. When I tapped the screen, it opened straight into the camera app. That felt strange. The last time I'd used it was during the day, taking photos near the stream. But the app wasn't open then, and I definitely didn't leave it out overnight. I checked the gallery. One new video, 14 seconds long. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but my hands started to feel cold even before I hit play. First, the screen was just black, for about 3 seconds. Then the video flickered like the camera was adjusting in the dark. It was lying on the ground, tilted up at an angle, facing toward the tent. Our tent. You could see the flap, dim and colorless in the low light. At the 7-second mark, something moved. A figure, tall. It passed in front of the camera slowly, so close the fabric of whatever it was wearing brushed against the lens. The camera didn't catch a clear face, just the shape. Shoulders, a hood or maybe messy hair. Too close to tell. But you could hear breathing. Loud, deep, in and out like someone standing still and taking slow, heavy breaths. At the 13-second mark, a hand appeared. It reached toward the tent flap. Pale, large, slightly dirty fingers. Right before the video cut out, it looked like the hand was about to grip the zipper. Then nothing. I stared at the screen for a long time after it ended. My heart was thudding. I replayed it once just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. But it was there. All of it. I didn't wake her right away. I just sat by the fire pit, staring at the trees, trying to listen for anything. I didn't hear anything moving. No branches cracking. No footsteps. But the fear didn't come in loud. Came quiet. Heavy. Like I could feel it in my chest. When she woke up and came out of the tent, I showed her the phone. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. She watched the video and just sat down on a log and stared at the dirt. We both knew we weren't imagining it. The food bag was still up in the tree. Nothing in camp looked touched. No footprints that we could see. But we didn't feel safe anymore. Not even close. We packed everything as fast as we could. No breakfast. Didn't even change clothes. Just stuffed the gear into our packs, tore down the tent, and got moving. The whole hike back, I kept checking over my shoulder. Every few minutes. She stayed close, never more than a few feet behind me. The woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt like they were holding their breath. When we got back to the car, it was still early morning. The lot was empty. I checked the tires, checked the doors. Everything looked normal. We threw the gear in the back and drove until we had signal again. When we got to town, I charged the phone and transferred the video to my laptop. We watched it again, slower this time, frame by frame. The last frame, the one right before it cuts out, is the clearest. The hand is inches from the tent zipper. And now that we could pause it, you could see something else in the edge of the frame. A second figure. Just the corner of a shoulder and a bit of sleeve. They weren't alone. We haven't gone back. Haven't camped since. I don't know who was out there with us. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. They weren't animals. And they weren't lost. We were scouting a spot to hunt in southern Alabama, late October. Not quite peak season, but close enough that the weather was getting crisp in the mornings. The kind of quiet, flat cold that settles into your jacket and clings to your skin if you're not moving. Me and my buddy Craig had been walking since early morning, maybe around 5, mostly bushwhacking through thick brush and pine. We were looking for a good spot to set up a permanent blind, something off the beaten path, where deer hadn't already been spooked by other hunters. We'd marked some potential trails on the topo map the night before, thinking if we got deep enough, we'd find something untouched. Around midday, Craig pointed to a small ridge that overlooked a low-lying area near a creek. Looked promising, like the kind of place bucks might move through around dusk. We climbed up and started looking for sign, scat, tracks, rubs. That's when we spotted the blind. It was half sunk into the ridge, well camouflaged. One of those permanent ones made of plywood and painted dull green, with some moss growing over the roof. From a distance, it just looked like part of the brush. Honestly, we almost missed it. Only reason we saw it at all was the glint of sunlight bouncing off what looked like a nail or bolt sticking out of the side. We approached slow. People sometimes get weird about their hunting spots, especially if you're somewhere remote. But the thing looked abandoned. Wood was rotting around the base, door half hanging off a rusted hinge. Still, something about it made me feel off, like we weren't supposed to be near it. Craig was the first to peek in. He froze. I asked what he saw, but he didn't say anything. Just kind of stepped back with this weird look on his face. Not scared exactly, just thrown off. I leaned in to look. Inside was this human-shaped figure dressed head to toe in camo. Not moving, just sitting in the corner on an old camping chair, facing the narrow shooting window. There were beer cans at its feet, and a hunting magazine on a crate beside it. For a second, my stomach dropped. I thought we'd found a corpse. But then I noticed the angle of the neck, too stiff. The hands, plastic. It was a mannequin. That was almost worse. The thing looked like someone had tried to make it look real. Like really real. It had gloves on, boots, a camo face mask pulled up over its mouth, aviator sunglasses over its eyes, a blaze orange hat set on the floor nearby, like someone had thrown it off in a rush. We both just stood there for a minute, unsure what to think. Maybe someone used it to scare off coyotes, or to keep deer away from that ridge. We'd seen weirder stuff out in the woods, but this felt too deliberate. Craig walked around the side to check out the back of the blind. That's when he noticed the camera. Mounted on the mannequin's shoulder was a small GoPro, the kind you'd clip to a bike helmet or kayak. It was aimed at the shooting window but slightly tilted, just enough to catch a portion of the blind's interior too. The red light was blinking. It was recording. That's when we both stepped back. Craig kept repeating under his breath that someone had been there recently. Batteries on those things don't last forever. And it hadn't been raining recently either, so the lens wasn't fogged. The ports weren't corroded. It was clean, maintained. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. That part of the woods was at least 3 miles off any marked trail. No cell service, no cabins nearby. You'd only know about that spot if you really knew the land. We didn't say anything, just turned and walked. Not fast, but steady, like something might be watching. Back at the truck, neither of us mentioned it. Just got in, drove back to the cabin we were staying at. We packed up and headed home that night instead of the next morning, like we'd planned. About a week later, I got a small package in the mail. Plain brown cardboard, no return address. No postage either, which was weird. It had just been left in my mailbox. Inside was a flash drive taped to a piece of cardboard. That was it. No note. I plugged it into my laptop. My stomach was already turning, but I had to know. There were 4 video files on it, all time-stamped with the same date, 7 days ago, the same day we found the blind. The first video showed the inside of the blind from the mannequin's shoulder. You could see the window, the view of the ridge, the trees swaying in the breeze. Then we appeared. You could see us walking up from the creek, not just from that camera either. The second video was from a different angle, higher up, maybe from a tree. We passed directly in front of it. The third was from behind, catching us as we moved around the blind. And the fourth, this one chilled me, was ground level, maybe set in the roots of a tree or in a rock crevice. You could hear our boots crunching over leaves. You could see Craig's hand touch the frame of the blind. Someone had recorded us from at least 4 spots, all at once. That meant the cameras had been set up ahead of time, and someone had come back after we left to collect them. They knew we'd been there. I shut the laptop. My hands were shaking. Craig didn't answer when I called, so I drove over to his place, told him everything, showed him the videos. We didn't go to the cops. What would we even say? That we walked into someone's blind and found a mannequin with a camera? That someone had filmed us from hidden cameras on public land? Technically, we weren't trespassing, and technically, no crime had happened. But we both agreed on one thing: we weren't going back into those woods. About 2 weeks later, I was driving home from work. It was dark. I pulled into my driveway and noticed something sitting on my porch. Another box. I didn't go near it at first, just stood at the edge of the porch staring. Eventually, I opened it. Inside was another flash drive and a piece of paper, not typed, handwritten, just said, "Nice spot. You should come back." The drive had new footage, me and Craig again, but this time from the opposite ridge. Zoomed in. The footage wasn't from a mounted GoPro, it was handheld. You could see the camera sway slightly, hear the breeze, the sound of someone breathing, watching. That was the last straw. I moved a week later. Different town, different job. Craig did the same not long after. We don't really talk about it anymore. People laugh when I tell them why I won't hunt alone. Some even joke that it was just some hunter messing with us. But I know what I saw. I know someone went to a lot of effort to stay hidden, to watch, and I know they weren't done when we left. I don't go in the woods anymore. I still think about that night more often than I want to. Every time I try to forget it, something brings it back. A barking dog on the street, a snap of branches in the woods. That trip to northern Minnesota was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Me, Josh, and Derek. We'd all grown up camping together, spent more nights under canvas than I can count. We weren't new to the outdoors. That part matters, I think, because we knew what was normal and what wasn't. It was late September, cool but not freezing yet. The leaves had started to turn, reds and golds stretching out in every direction. We picked a spot near a small lake, a few miles off the main trail. Not many people hiked that far out. That's why we liked it. Quiet, untouched, wild. We set up camp late afternoon, got the fire going, boiled some water for the freeze-dried meals we brought. The lake was glass still. Not a single ripple, except when a loon called once and dipped under. Everything felt normal then, peaceful. We talked around the fire until maybe 11. Dumb stories, mostly. Josh cracked open a flask he'd snuck in. I had one beer. Derek didn't drink much. Around midnight, we turned in. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No wind, no owls, just stillness. That kind of silence makes you notice the smallest sounds. I must have fallen asleep fast because I woke up later to barking. It didn't register right away. I was in that half-sleep where your brain doesn't process things fully. But once I did wake up, it hit me hard. Those weren't coyotes or wolves. These were dogs, big ones. And they weren't just barking wild either. There was rhythm to it, like bursts, deep, sharp barks, controlled. At first I thought I imagined it, but then Josh rustled in his sleeping bag beside me. I could tell he was awake too, even though neither of us said anything. You don't have to talk to know when someone else is hearing the same thing. Derek was in the other tent. I didn't hear him move, but later he told me he'd been awake too, lying stiff, listening just like us. The barking wasn't right near us, somewhere off in the trees, maybe a few hundred yards, close enough to hear clearly, but not close enough to see anything. I tried to tell myself it was rangers, maybe some kind of training exercise. Maybe they used dogs to track poachers or missing hikers, but it didn't sit right. Why would they do it this far off trail in the middle of the night with no warning? No signs, no lights. We didn't hear footsteps, no twigs snapping, just the barking. Then around 3 a.m. we heard something else. A voice, a man's voice, sharp and loud, cutting through the trees like a whip. Stay, then silence. A few seconds later, down, another pause. Search. It wasn't yelling like someone lost their dog. It was calm, measured, like someone used to giving commands and expecting obedience. But that was the weird part. There were no lights, no flashlight beams bouncing off the trees, no lantern glow. If you've ever been in the woods at night, you know how dark it gets. You can't take 5 steps without stumbling unless you have a light. But whoever it was, they weren't using one. And we didn't hear them walking, just the commands. I lay there frozen. My fingers had curled around the handle of my knife without thinking. My heart thudded loud in my ears. I kept waiting for something else, for the barking to get closer, for the sounds of movement through the brush. But nothing came, just silence again. The kind of silence that feels full, like it's holding its breath. I don't know how long I lay there. An hour maybe. I didn't sleep again that night. None of us did. When the sky finally started to lighten, we got up fast. No breakfast, just packed everything as quickly as we could. No one said much. We didn't need to. We all felt it, the wrongness, like we'd brushed up against something we weren't supposed to see. As we were finishing up, Derek noticed something on a tree just behind where we tied up our food bag. Claw marks, 4 of them, deep grooves dug into the bark. But low, way lower than a bear would reach, maybe chest height. And the spacing, it didn't look like a bear at all. Closer together, more like a dog's but wider, like something big, trained maybe, practiced. That's when something shifted in my gut. The claw marks weren't just from a dog passing through. They looked intentional, like someone was training them to scratch or hit on command. Right next to our campsite. We left fast after that. Didn't stop to eat until we were back at the car. Even then, none of us really relaxed. On the drive back, we tried to make sense of it. We kept looping back to the same possibilities. Poachers maybe, or someone running some kind of dog training operation off the books. But that didn't explain the way they moved at night without light, or how quiet they were, or why they were out there at that hour so deep in the woods, giving commands like that. Not once did we hear a human step, not a cough, not a branch break. Back home, I spent a night Googling things. Military dog training facilities, Ranger K9 units. Nothing matched up with the area we were in. It was just forest land. No posted warnings, no restricted signs, nothing. I called the ranger station a few days later, just to ask. I didn't mention what we heard, just said we thought we heard dogs at night and wondered if there was some kind of patrol. The guy on the phone sounded confused, said they didn't use dogs in that region. No training programs either. Closest K9 unit was counties away, and even they only worked with local search and rescue, mostly near towns or popular trails. I didn't tell him anything else, just thanked him and hung up. I haven't gone back to that part of Minnesota since. I still hike, still camp, but I pay closer attention now. To noises, to strange signs. I keep my knife closer, my flashlight brighter, and I don't camp without a quick way to pack and go. Because somewhere out there, in those woods, someone was doing something. Something quiet, organized, and close, and we were never supposed to hear it.